Hello, William Grantsville Art Center community. This is Danielle Gomez, and today I'm going to teach you how to make your own cyanotypes, or sun prints. Cyanotypes originated in the 1840s as a copying and printing technique popular among architects and engineers for making large-scale reproductions of their drawings. This is where the idea of a blueprint comes from. A blueprint literally refers to the color of the cyanotype, cyan meaning blue, and it's a Prussian blue that emerges when the print, which is on photosensitive paper or surface, interacts with the sun. So here's what you're going to need for this project before we begin. Because the print is going to go through multiple washes, meaning it's going to interact with water, you're going to need a heavy-duty watercolor paper or fabric. You're also going to need the two chemicals, which I'll talk about later, that you can get in a cyanotype kit from Blick. You're also going to need a paintbrush, latex gloves to protect yourself, because while they're pretty gentle, these chemicals can be hard for sensitive skin. And you'll need hydrogen peroxide as well for part of the process that I'll talk about more in a little bit. So the set that I got was from Blick, and cyanotypes are made up of two chemicals, which are potassium ferricyanide and ferric ammonium citrate. The ferric ammonium citrate is the one that's a little greener, you'll see when you start mixing them. And this came in a powdered form. So you can see what that looks like in my hand. It's kind of like an ochre powder. And so in order to make my solution, I mixed it with water. So for each container, fill it with water and then shake it up, and then that's all you need to create your solution A and solution B. So it'll go from two powders that you receive into a completely liquid form in both solutions. So once you finalize the solutions, they should remain stable in their containers and their liquid form for up to a year. So once you make this chemical solution, you can continue to take it out and use it for about a year. However, once you combine the two solutions together, that mixture only lasts about 2 to 4 hours, which is what we're going to make now. Next, we're going to mix our two chemicals together, and the process I did was just equal parts of solution A and solution B. So go ahead and put your gloves on for safety. I did this in a bathroom with no windows and no light. I had a light on because I'm recording, but it's really best, because this paper is photosensitive, that you do it in really low light. So do it in a room that either has, just a little, you're cracking the door open so a little bit of light's coming through, or has a night light, or has something that's really dim. You can even do it by candlelight if you need to. But I'm doing it with just the normal lights on because I need to film it. So I put in solution A, and then I'm going to follow it with an equal parts of solution B, which is, again, solution A is ferric ammonium citrate, and solution B is the potassium ferricyanide. You can see that the potassium ferricyanide is a little bit darker, it's a little bit greener. And as you mix them together, you should see it makes this kind of yellow-green color. And it's pretty easy to mix them together. It shouldn't have any grain, any texture if you've shaken the bottle enough. And now it's ready for use. So go ahead and prepare your area to apply the solution. So then you're going to go ahead and apply it to your watercolor paper. Again, you want to apply it to a surface that can really absorb a lot of water, because this is going to be a very wet process, which you'll see later. So I'm using my gloves. I'm going ahead and applying it with just a cheap paintbrush to make sure that the surface is completely covered. I'm going to start with horizontal strokes and also do vertical strokes. A lot of people prefer to apply this with sponges, which you can also do, because you don't get the brush strokes. As you'll see later in a few of mine, you can actually see the brush strokes because I added on a layer afterwards. To get the most even surface, you want to apply it like this all at once in horizontal and vertical strokes, and then leave it. Don't add anything else. Don't mess with it. Try not to move it. The paper's gonna curl a little bit because it's wet, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to apply. I put paper towels down to kind of protect my counter, but you're going to want to wash your counter down and every surface that comes into contact with the chemicals. So go ahead and repeat this process with the rest of your papers. I used 6 watercolor papers that are 11 by 15, and that lasted with the entire solution that I made, which was about a cup total. And then I put them somewhere that they need to dry in a place that's really dark. So I turned the lights off and I let them dry in this bathroom. It should take a couple hours to dry, so go ahead and just leave them and don't disturb them. But this is a good time to go and gather materials for your prints, and you can use anything. I decided to make botanical prints by gathering plants and leaves with interesting shapes from my garden, but you can use anything in your house. You can use forks, you can use a stuffed animal, you can use anything that will sit in the sun. You can even use your own hand or face as long as you protect yourself against the sun. So be creative with the objects that you use, and notice how a more opaque object versus a more transparent object affects the outcome of your print. I suggest kind of arranging how you want things to go before you put your paper down, because immediately you can already see the color changing from a yellow to this kind of gray-green. And because it's already being changed and altered by the sun is altering its pH and making the print. So kind of know where you want to place things before you put your paper down. You can even arrange it in the dark or in a place with not a lot of light, and then bring it out instead of arranging it like I did. And this is fast forwarded. This was about an 8-minute exposure, meaning that I left it in the sun. So it went from the darkness into the sun and sat like this for 8 minutes. That describes what I call the exposure time. And the amount of time that you leave in exposure is going to affect the print a little bit. So you'll see that. And then I repeated this process with my other objects. It's a maple leaf, it's different leaves and pieces of a hydrangea. And I left them for different exposures, and you can already see that they have really different colors. One is a more true blue, and the others are a little bit grayer. Next up in the printing process, we're going to be putting our papers through a wash. This means that we're going to be washing the chemicals off of our print in order to have the blue cyan color emerge and really see the difference in the negative and positive space created by our exposures. So I used cool running water for this process, and it's really important that you agitate the paper like what I'm doing. If you want to save water, you can also just move it back and forth. You can fill up your tub a little bit more, but it's a little bit more effective when you have running water directly on the paper. So go ahead and see what's best for you. You can see that there's blue bleeding into the tub. That's our chemicals coming off. That's our solution A and solution B. And the more water and the more time that we put into taking them off, the clearer the print gets. So that dark blue is where we had the most exposure. That's where the sun was directly on the page. And the whiter areas are where it was not as exposed because we had our objects there, and that's how we get the print. And it's actually pretty detailed, which is why it was used by a lot of scientists who were studying botany, as well as people who were making really detailed architectural drawings. I went ahead and added hydrogen peroxide, which is something that a lot of people have in first aid kits. And you can see it immediately darkens the print and it darkens the blue. You don't have to add hydrogen peroxide, it's optional. This will also happen when you just leave your print out, and it will naturally oxidize or interact with the air, which will bring out the color even more. So you can either just wash it off and not add hydrogen peroxide. This is what I'm doing here. You can see it immediately changes it to a much darker blue. That is what will happen over time, but I wanted you to see the process a little bit faster, so I added hydrogen peroxide. It's up to you if you want to use that or not. So I went ahead and repeated this process with the rest of my prints. It's important to note that cyanotype is a negative process, a negative printing process. Areas where light does not hit the sensitized paper or material will remain white. So the highest value areas, and value is referring to the deepest tones, the darkest areas, are the places that have the most exposure. And the places that are white or even light blue have the least amount of exposure because that's where our objects were. And this process that we're doing of washing the prints and helping to bring them out is called developing the prints. And it's something that you also see in photography in many ways. You can even do this process using film negatives and develop photos this way. Another one of our prints, I add the hydrogen peroxide and it darkens up immediately. Continue to agitate the paper, turn it around so all parts of the paper get wet. You also want to make sure that it's not bleeding anymore. It's not, you don't see any more color coming off. The water should be clear, and that's when you know your print is pretty much done. You'll see a little bit of like green and blue. Those are our leaves. Those are our leaves with different caterpillar bites in it, which is really interesting. You can see the ways that an object that allows light in, even in small ways, affects the print. This is an example of an overexposed print. So I had multiple leaves on this paper. However, because one of them fell off during the process, it was blown off by the wind, and because I added it back later, too much sun got exposed to that area of the print. So you could kind of see the faint leaves before we began developing, but now that the blue is being developed by the water and the hydrogen peroxide and it's oxidizing, it's now completely disappeared and that part of the print has been overexposed. Now we're ready to let our prints dry. So I left them to dry on my porch where they were out of direct sunlight, but where they could still air dry without being trampled on. And these are my 6 prints. And you can kind of see all the different variety. The blue is really crisp now. And when we lay them all out later, this is after they've completely dried. You can see the colors changed a little bit. They actually captured quite a lot of detail. As I zoom in, these are the hydrangea petals and leaves. Those areas are where the hydrangea was drier, and you can actually see the drier parts of it. You can get all of the detail of these buds. This is where all of the light came through in our caterpillar bitten leaves, and there's actually a lot of detail involved in these prints, which is why they're so popular for copying and printmaking. So these came out great on paper, but you can also apply these to fabric. So I applied my solution to an old pillowcase. When you're applying to fabric, the drying time is a little longer, so once I completely covered this, I left this to dry overnight. And then I repeated the same process. I found some botanicals, and this is the fast forwarding of about a 10-minute exposure. I did a rose on one side, and then I went ahead and flipped it and did another bouquet that I had on the other. And you can see there's roses attached to a branch above it. That shadow also got captured. And you can see it represented on our final print. Next, you can develop your print just as you would with a paper print by running it under cold water. You can already see it coming through. It's kind of like a really ghostly, phantasmagoric kind of printmaking process to me. It also looks to me like an X-ray. There's something about the way that the print comes out that is really kind of haunting. You can see that the fabric bleeds a lot more than the paper, and I'm speeding this up. I washed this for almost 12-15 minutes, but added the hydrogen peroxide just like I would with my paper. But you're going to want to keep washing it until the water comes out clear. That means that you've cleared it of all chemicals, and then it's ready to be put out to dry. Again, I wanted to leave it out of direct sunlight, but somewhere where it could get a lot of air drying. And then we had our print. This is the one side with roses. The first rose that we had, and you see all the leaves and the kind of like more the other rose shadows. And then this is our bouquet on the other side, and it actually picks up a lot of detail. Thank you for watching this video. For more art and music instruction, check out William Grant Still Art Center's social media pages. And please tag us in any projects that you complete or make at home. We'd love to see your artwork. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.